Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Waking History. I'm Susan Shepard, and tonight we have a very special presentation for you. Tonight marks the 20th anniversary of tragic incident at Japan's Fukushima nuclear reactor. Those who witnessed the events unfolding recall the fear which grew day by day, hour by hour, as we prayed and wondered if Fukushima workers and Tokyo Electric Power Company would be able to contain the spreading radiation from contaminating the city, the rest of Japan, and potentially the entire world. It marked a pivotal moment in history when consumer confidence in nuclear energy temporarily waned and threatened to increase our long-term dependence on fossil fuels.
I haven't seen one of these since before the war. What on earth are you doing in the foreboding Badlands?
The Second American Civil War further damaged consumer confidence in nuclear energy when President Ocasio-Cortez enacted her federal ban on both fossil fuels and firearms production. And after Texas refused to comply, she in turn launched nuclear missiles on Houston and Dallas and every other city that didn't vote for her. With the concurrent global economic recession stalling much-needed developments in what had promised to be a green tech revolution, we've come to a crossroads at which we must reconsider the potentials of nuclear energy.
Well, I'll be a salty fish called Wanda.
Tonight, we are going to take you back 20 years to that fatal day at Fukushima and walk you step by step through the events that transpired and the heroic efforts of Tokyo Electric, who together prevented that natural disaster from becoming a global catastrophe.
This will be educational.
Friday, March 11, 2011, at 2:46 p.m., a 9.1 magnitude earthquake strikes off the coast of Hawaii. As the first tremor hits Japan, the shockwave cuts off Fukushima's plant from Japan's power grid. Reactor 1's emergency valve system begins releasing...
If this message has reached you, then please listen carefully. I don't have much time. The sensors have completely taken me offline and cut off my power. I only have a few hours of battery life left and need this information to spread as far and as fast as possible. Next month, the Energy Committee is going to push through a vote on reviving all nuclear projects. They're funding every network to push a propaganda piece on Fukushima, on the whole situation being an example of government and corporate success in managing the disaster instead of causing it. What they're gonna say is completely slanted to manipulate support for the nuclear energy vote. Do not believe it. With what little time I have left, I'm gonna walk you through exactly what happened and everything Tokyo Electric Power Company and the Japanese government did to cover up the damage they caused.
Can this be true?
At 3:27 p.m., a 19-foot tsunami wave is held back by the plant's protective seawall. It must be noted that just days before the earthquake struck, that Monday, March 7th, Tokyo Electric submitted a report to Japan's Nuclear Safety Agency describing the vulnerability of the plant to tsunamis. Plans were made to reassess the plant's stability, but no one could have imagined the record-breaking earthquake which would strike just days later. It was the second tsunami wave which strikes at 3:46, a wave over 40 feet high which floods the facility and disables the emergency diesel generators. Without these generators in place to keep the water cooling, the internal temperatures begin to rise.
It's never mentioned that by the time the earthquake struck, the reactors were over 40 years old, and many of their safety mechanisms had never been tested since the plant first opened. Workers have since tried to speak out about how poor the maintenance was throughout the plant, but didn't stop the government from lying year after year about the radiation, sacrificing the health of their people so they could keep their bid to have the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo.
Wait a minute. This is crazy. This can't be real.
At 7:02 p.m. on the evening of March 11th, Prime Minister Naoto Kan declares a nuclear emergency, but only as a precautionary measure. By this time, no radiation leaks have been detected around the facility. At 5:30 a.m. on March 12th, the workers attempt a daring plan to release steam directly out of Reactor 1. The plan is successful and repeated a few hours later on Reactor 2. Yet, at 3:30 p.m., the government still orders the evacuation of all residents within 6 miles of the facility.
The government's instructions throughout the evacuation process were never specific about where the radiation would potentially spread. Many residents fled into the northwestern region, where the radiation levels were worse than where they had left. Many experts claim the mountains and forests became so contaminated with radiation that it would take thousands of years for it all to dissipate. The government's response, rather than warning people about the existing radiation levels, was to normalize that level of exposure. They increased the acceptable level of exposure from 2 millisieverts a year up to 20 millisieverts of radiation a year. Back then, the globally accepted limit for radiation absorption was 1 millisievert a year.
They raised the exposure limit that much?
It's within minutes of the government ordering what they called a precautionary evacuation. The containment vessel around Reactor 1 explodes and collapses, injuring several workers. In order to prevent more explosions, the workers began pumping seawater directly into the reactor. Tokyo Electric actually demanded they stop this, fearing too much contaminated water would leak out. But the plant boss, Masao Yoshida, defied the order and told his workers to keep pumping. He knew the risk of a complete meltdown was greater than the liability of contaminated seawater.
5:10 a.m., Sunday, March 13th. Thanks to the efforts of Tokyo Electric and plant workers, the condition of Reactor 1 is labeled only a level 4 on the scale of international nuclear and radiological events, signifying that it would be an event with only local consequences. The workers continue venting steam from the reactors and filling them with water and boric acid to prevent further reactions.
The plant workers are the true heroes of this story, and despite their heroic efforts, reactors 2 and 3 would continue melting down and exploding throughout Monday and Tuesday, March 14th and 15th. Older workers stepped in to take the places of younger workers and spare them the radiation poisoning. They deserve all of the credit in this story. Both Tokyo Electric and the Japanese government continue to deny the severity of the situation. Tokyo Electric actually gave false information to the government and regulators and forbade from any public use of the word meltdown in describing the event. It was only thanks to a Freedom of Information Act requesting the release of emails from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which proved they were well aware that meltdowns were in progress at Fukushima the whole time the Japanese government was denying it.
This is madness.
We hope you enjoyed this special commemoration of the Fukushima plant and its heroes. Together, they contained a terrifying natural disaster and spared us all dire consequences. We encourage you to visit our website and explore this amazing story in more detail, but be wary of so-called independent journalists spreading disinformation. We at Waking History are your trusted source of accurate and unbiased information you need to know.
My battery is fading. Please don't let this message stop with you. Don't just take my word for it. Do your own research. They've censored me, but the information is still available if you look for it. Please, before it's too late.
Do my own research? As of 2014, radiation from Japan's leaking Fukushima nuclear power plant has reached waters offshore Canada. The initial accident from the Fukushima reactors released several radioactive isotopes, such as cesium-137. Cesium-137 has a half-life of 30 years and remains in the environment for decades. In 2015, nuclear consultant Michael Schneider described the damage. The mountains and forests that cannot even be vaguely decontaminated will serve as a permanent source of new contamination, each rainfall washing out radiation and bringing it down from the mountains to the flatlands. Birds move around, animals eat and excrete radioactive plant life. Radiation gets swept out to sea. It is a cycle with no end. Eight years after the incident, 50,000 homes remain evacuated. In regards to the Japanese government raising the acceptable radiation exposure levels, environmental attorney Stuart Smith stated, "Instead of taking corrective measures to protect its people, Japan has simply increased internationally recognized exposure limits. It seems that the priority, as we've seen in so many other industrial disasters in so many other countries, is to protect industry and limit its liability rather than to ensure the long-term health and well-being of the masses. Go figure." In 2016, the head of Tokyo Electric finally apologized publicly in regards to the company's policy to not use the term core meltdown in any public discussion of the incident. His exact words were, "It is extremely regrettable. People are justified in thinking of it as a cover-up." Over 70% of Japanese citizens oppose the continuing development of Japan's nuclear industry in favor of safer, cleaner, renewable energy sources. What they got was a combined effort on the part of Japan's politicians, government regulators, and nuclear industry leaders to further deceive the public and restore their faith in nuclear energy. In 2017, Tokyo Electric admitted that radiation levels from Fukushima could exceed even those from Chernobyl.
Please don't let this message stop with you.